So I just wanted to show some statistics, just again to give us a little background in what we have in our country. And as we all know, statistics are not necessarily what is really happening on the ground. These are just the reported statistics. And so in 2015, we had a total of 859 reports of family violence. And this was, because I say family violence, because it was reported from age 0 all the way up to the end of time for people. So out of those reports, 727 of them were made about women or girls being the victim. And that constitutes 85% of the reports are made that violence is directed towards women and girls. And 132 were made with violence directed towards men and boys. And that is, of course, then 15%. I was kind of curious if the men and boys category was more for young children towards boys, but it was not. The primary people that are experiencing violence, the big numbers were falling in the ages from 15 to 34 in both genders. And you can see the breakdown. Emotional was the highest reported of 351, physical next, sexual, neglect, and economic. In my other role as a counselor, I would have to say that the report of the sexual violence is very low. We have, again, a normalized sexuality for children that is abusive. There is a lot of sexual abuse going on in homes, primarily with children. But those are the statistics that were given to me by the epidemic. I can't say that word, by the Ministry of Health in Belize. I'll just break down to that. And so we can come off of there now. So what about the law? What does the law say about domestic violence in Belize? We do have laws, and the laws have been on the books for many years, for almost going on 20 years. The Domestic Abuse Violence Act has been on the books. It is obviously underreported, just like it is anywhere else. And we have laws for protection. There is a lack of follow-through. A lot of the lack of follow-through is because it's not necessarily taken seriously. Even though we have a domestic violence unit in the police force who are officers that should have additional training, it's not always happening the way it should. Primarily or specifically when you have an officer who is accused of being the perpetrator. And many times the people are told that they cannot file a protection order because the police officer has to be able to go wherever he is needed, and they're giving false information. So that does happen. Marital rape has also been on the books for many years, and there's never been a case filed yet of marital rape. And obviously we know that has happened. We also have 2 domestic violence shelters in the entire country. We have one in the city, in Belize City, which is our main metropolitan area. And we have one in another district. They do not have much support, financial support. They're always trying to find money in order to provide the services, and the services are very short term. If you're from North America, where you have welfare and you have other kinds of services, we don't have anything like that in Belize. So if a woman leaves her home and she goes to the shelter, there's 21 days that she's able to be there with her children, and then she's on her own. And there's no financial support if she doesn't have a job or she doesn't have any other kind of income. So it makes it very difficult for people to leave. There's also, it's a very small community, as you can see, and so that means we have a lot of dual relationships, which also means that protection is very difficult. If you go from the northernmost part of the country to the southernmost part of the country, that's only going to take you about 4, maybe 5 hours by car to drive. And so it's very difficult to hide or to get away from violence because you just can't. And there are people that will know where you are. Just to set the scene, we've also had a sexual harassment policy on the books for, I think, about 15 years, and there's never been a case filed of sexual harassment in the country either. So when I walked into the country, I arrived there in 2002. I had just gotten my black belt in Taekwondo, and and at my school, I did have a teacher that taught us empowerment, self-defense. So I was well versed in that. And there was a gentleman in the community. I didn't have any idea I would ever be teaching self-defense before I went there. There's a gentleman in the community that owned a gym. He heard about me and he said, come and teach karate to my students, because all martial arts in Belize is karate. And I asked why, because I knew the women had many other obligations besides just going to work. And he said, for self-defense. And I said, I could teach that. And so I started to develop my program from there. And it was all trial by error. I knew what I needed to do a program in the United States, where I came from, but I didn't really know what I needed to do a program in Belize. And so I found out very quickly that the cookie cutter, take what I know and just try to put it on here, doesn't work. And so the beginning was a lot of difficulty, and a lot of people in Belize would tell me, this is never going to work here. Nobody's going to want this. You're never going to get ahead. You're just banging your head against a wall. But somehow I persisted. And luckily what happened was, a person that was in my very first class was a Peace Corps worker. And she worked with the Women's Department, which is a department within our Ministry of Human Development. And she said to me, you need to come and teach the women in our domestic violence group. And so I did. And that was the best thing that ever happened as far as this happening, because getting in with the Women's Department was the one ally I really had. You see, we don't have domestic violence shelters very much. We don't have rape centers. We don't have crisis lines. We don't have any of those natural allies that we would maybe have in North America. But I had the Women's Department. And so I got in there. The very first class that I gave was to 20 women in a hallway, because that's the space we had. So you have to also be able to adapt yourself. And that was the beginning of my starting to learn how to adapt myself. So it's really important when you're going into a community to be able to identify the cultural differences. It's really a no-brainer, but when you're not thinking about it every minute, it is a brainer. If you're not thinking about it, then you just do what comes naturally. And that doesn't always work. And as you saw, we have very different kind of communities in Belize. So I can't even say, here's how you do it in Belize. I can say, here's how you do it in Belize here. And then you go to the next village and you have to do it here differently. And you go to this town and you have to do it a little bit different here. So I think that's one of the biggest things. Particularly if you're going into a community that you're not there, is find out who your allies are, and you have to keep pounding on the door. When I did the first class in my town with the Women's Department, that really wasn't my total in. I was in that town. I started writing letters. I started making appointments, and I just kept doing it until somebody said, okay, let's talk. And that's when it took off. So it's very important to look for those areas that might not maybe seem natural allies, working with the religious communities, working with youth groups, working with, we have something called Girl Guides, which is kind of like Girl Scouts. And all of those kinds of things have been the way I've kind of gotten myself around. Other things that you have to realize is, and I had to really realize, was the meaning of verbal and nonverbal interactions. When we're teaching empowerment, self-defense, how are we approaching people? What is normal? And what is going to be recognized as abnormal? So one of the things that we have in Belize in particular is eye contact is very different. Eye contact is sort of seen as intimidating and threatening. Even the therapeutic kind of eye contact that I would do as a counselor was seen as threatening and intimidating. And it's been a lot of work for me in my counseling practice to not do that. But when we talk about self-defense, I remember that there were times when I would be doing exercises with people, and I would have an exercise where I would say, someone will put their hand on your shoulder, you turn around, and you simply tell them, take your hand off. I would demonstrate, and people would do it, and they wouldn't make eye contact. And I would say, but you have to make eye contact. They're looking at people's feet. You have to make eye contact. You're looking at the people's feet. You have to make eye contact. You're looking at the people's feet. Until one time, I really watched it with a different set of eyes. And I noticed that the women were looking at the feet and saying, let me go. And they'd raise their head up and boom, right in the eyes at the end. So I started to call it the boom. And the boom is very powerful. So they got a whole look at the person. Start at the feet, take your hands off of me, boom. Okay. So it was something that I had to learn, that I had to teach differently. You can do it this way, or you can do it this way, or you can do it this way. And even in our cultures there, we have, even each one of our cultures has different ways of doing that. Another one that is different is proximity, or how close you can be to someone, personal space. I, as a North American, we all know, or we should know, it's individual, but it's very cultural as well. I, as an American, have a gigantic amount of personal space. If I don't know you, if you get closer than the end of my fingertips, you can't get in there. That's my space. I have this giant part of personal space. And even though in Belize, we have a lot of room and space, we have very few people, so we have a lot more room. Their personal space is very small for the most part. People are right up on you all the time. And I found that very hard to deal with myself. So I had to realize, when we do this personal space exercise, people are going to get closer, and that's perfectly fine. They don't have to have the same amount of space that I have to have. I also learned some things that were beneficial, and they don't always work here. I had never taught a class in the United States in empowerment self-defense until last summer. I came home to my little hometown in Illinois, and they asked me to do a class. And I kept having to say, I don't know if it works in the United States. I know this works in Belize. One of the things I know will not work here, but it works very well in Belize, is this. I'll demonstrate it a little bit here. When somebody that you don't want to approach you is approaching you. So for instance, we have people who are selling things on the streets. We have people who are begging kind of every day. And once you live there, you get to know these people. They come on the bus, they have a little sign that says, please help me. I'm sick, or I have some disability. Every day they're making like, $100 a day begging, but good for them, I guess. But when they come up to, and I have noticed this with other foreigners who have moved there, they let the people get right in their space because they don't know what to do. They see you coming with the sign, so they let you get close enough to give the sign. But I learned a long time ago that if somebody's approaching you, they have this little wooden boat in their hand they want to sell you, or they've got a little sign, or they've got a bucket and a sponge and they want to wash your car, the thing you would do is simply turn your head to the side and wave your finger and say, no, not today. No, thank you, not today. Now, I don't know about anybody who's from North America, but I know that that is seen as really super rude. Wagging your finger at another adult and saying something to the person is rude. And I learned that for sure when I came to the United States to visit one time, and I did that to a waitress. When she said, is that all? And I said, no, I need to order. And she just looked at me like, you don't do that here. Okay. So that is something that I've taught when I've taught classes with foreigners. I've taught them that because it was easy for them to learn that. Also, verbals. These are some things, again, that are very useful in Belize, but we probably wouldn't do them in the United States for the most part. In Belize, we do greet each other. And so we will say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to anybody. It doesn't have to be someone that you know. And so that is something that I have used in my teaching, that if you feel like somebody is following you, one of the easiest things to do is to just turn around and say, good morning. It works there. It works there because you're telling somebody, I see you right there, and you're getting a good look at the person and you're moving on. Would it work here? I don't know. I think that sometimes if we say good morning to someone we don't know, they'd run away screaming, thinking we're going to shoot them in the United States. So that's been one experience. I've worked with people in lots of different categories too within Belize. And so I just want to talk a little bit about my experience working with the LGBT plus group. About 10 years ago, we started to see people starting to make a movement for their rights, for equality, for less discrimination. And so the first group that was formed was a group called UNIBAM, and it's United Belizeans Against Advocacy Movement. Sorry, United Belizean Advocacy Movement. All right, so that was the first group, and it was just really an advocacy group. And there was a challenge that was made to a law that we have. We still have a law against sodomy in Belize. So it basically criminalized sodomy or criminalized anal intercourse. And that law was challenged by the executive director of UNIBAM in the courts, as made a constitutional challenge that it was against the right of privacy and it was against the right to life and happiness and all of those good things. It took a number of years for that to even get to the courts. There was a lot of discussion. And when the discussion happened, there came the violence. The violence started to be directed to the LGBT community. The violence started to be called upon particularly by evangelical missionaries that are based in the United States and come there and then say that the LGBT rights is a U.S. idea, although I would say their idea is also a U.S. idea. It took a number of years to get into the court, and after it was in the court, the violence increased. So I started working with that community as well. And it took, again, what you would do with an LGBT community in a place like the United States, where rights have been sort of talked about for many years, is very different than what you're doing in a community where we're just starting to talk about it. So those are some of my experiences. And now we will be passing it on to our next presenter to talk to you about her experiences.
So my name is Tamar Priel. I'm a self-defense instructor at El Alev in Israel. I also have a master's degree in social work and another one in cultural research. And my master's thesis was written about cultural adaptations in ESD programs. So for me, cultural adaptations are really important. And the reason is that, like Renee, for many years, I'm working in intercultural settings, so in the international aid and community development fields. And I was doing a lot of work with youth, women, communities over the years. And me and my colleagues kind of started to discover that we have a real challenge with sustainability. So either our interventions didn't work from the beginning, or they didn't work for the long run. We would do a course, a process, a training, and everyone seemed great at the end. But when we checked in a few years later, we found that those new skills, behaviors, feelings, and perceptions we worked on, they just didn't last. And I kept hearing these experiences from people in the international aid field, and I could see it's happening in many places. And in the last decade, this sustainability question is really on my mind a lot. And I was lucky a few years ago to meet Shira Langer. She's also an ESD instructor at El Alev and a social worker working in the international aid field. And we discovered that we were both really bothered by the same questions, and we were both busy thinking how to make intercultural interventions more sustainable. So it was about 4 years ago, in 2013, that Shira and I started spending a lot of our free time trying to learn from our successes and failures in the past. So we had ESD instruction experience. We were trained in cultural research and in working in intercultural settings. We knew how to develop and operate social change projects in developing countries. Between the two of us, we had years of on-field experience and 5 different academical degrees. And the question was, can we do intercultural ESD-based interventions better and more sustainable? And I don't know the answer yet, but in the last 4 years, Shira and I developed a work model called CAPE, which stands for Culturally Adapted Programs of ESD. And we piloted it first in Israel with Philippine women and with an NGO called Mesila. Our second pilot was in Nepal with the INGO Tevel, and our last pilot took place in the Dominican Republic with the help of Ella Lev and Judith, as well as the help of local Dominican NGOs and Temima Basel, who attends the camp now. We had mentors from our workplaces and academy who helped us, so we were really blessed with amazing partners, and we are so grateful for them, and we improved with each pilot. So the CAPE work model includes several strategies to create a sustainable intervention of ESD in a community. And today I will not tell you about all the strategies, but I do want to share more information about one strategy for sustainability, and that is doing cultural adaptations. So I'm going to start by telling you how Shira and I see the influence of culture on GBV and ESD and what we feel it means for us as ESD practitioners. And I hope we'll get the time to talk about what we actually do in CAPE. So just how does culture influence GBV? So we all know that gender-based violence is a global epidemic, right? 1 out of 3 women in the world. And I agree with that. But in looking at the forest of global gender-based violence, it is important that we not forget that the forest is made up of trees. So we argue that in each location on the global map, gender-based violence is different. So one might say that in each place, violence results in a woman being beaten or raped or killed, maybe, but gender-based violence isn't a snapshot. You all know that. It's a video. It's dynamic. Many things happen before that snapshot of rape or murder or a strike. So gender-based violence usually begins with words, harassments, manipulations, unwanted touch, silencing, boundary violations, and slowly it develops into physical and/or sexual violence. And I claim that these stages in this GBV video are local and cultural, and that GBV as a whole is influenced by gender rules, gender education, and gender power dynamics in a certain place and cultural community, which means that gender-based violence is a global epidemic, but it is also a local phenomenon influenced by local culture and gender norms. And this locality, I claim, is crucial in designing successful strategies for change. So another thing I want to suggest while thinking about this video, this continuum of gender-based violence, is that violence is scripted. I like the work of sociologist Martha McAuliffe, and I feel that she's actually studying scripted violent interactions, I think she calls them. And in a way, each scripted interaction, she said, is influenced by the ways the parties perceive violence, what happens in a violent situation, the feelings of each party, and the perceived action choices available for each party. Now, in my world, according to the cultural policy system theory and the cultural repertoire theory, we say that our social and cultural worlds are built out of scripted interactions. These scripted interactions are cultural and differ among cultural communities. So each of us, for example, is a member of different cultural communities. We learn many cultural scripted interactions throughout our lives. And we are capable, unconsciously, we don't know it, but we are capable of reenacting them all of those interactions. Without knowing, we are always choosing among them, using their relative symbolic capital in the society. We won't get into that. But following these cultural theories and McCarthy's ideas, today I want to use the phrase violence script. So script, obviously, is a very reductionist word for a more complex real situation. But I feel that due to time limits, we'll use the phrase script, and I invite you to remember it stands for a more dynamic and layered interactions. I can tell you more about this theoretical framework another time. But let's think about violence scripts. So each script, each interaction is written in the language of gender and culture. It is embodied into our bodies. And the lines we use, as well as the staging, follow the specifications of a director we cannot identify. And just as culture is dynamic, so are these cultural violence scripts. They're always changing. And how are we influenced by these scripts? Well, unconsciously, these scripts teach the members in a certain cultural location what is considered to be violence and how each side in a violent interaction is supposed to and capable of looking, feeling, thinking, and acting. Now, according to this theory, how can this idea of cultural scripts of violence help us in practice while designing interventions for the reduction and prevention of gender-based violence? So first, I would say that in order for us to do effective work, we need to know the local violence scripts and adjust the what and the how of our work to suit those local scripts. I would also say that we want to understand that our interventions might clash with local scripts and stir up some very natural local forms of psychological and cultural resistance. And by researching those in advance, we could work with them and not against them. And I feel we can also benefit from acknowledging that falling in love with the what and how of our work is fatal in this case. We want to change what and how we do, even if doing that might violate our personal ideology. We want to respect the fact that cultural scripts develop and are employed by people for good reasons, that we cannot always understand or agree with, and that our suggestions might not be organic or adopted by our students. And we need to be okay with that. So my question would be, why should we even bother to do all this? Why are cultural adaptations even needed? And my answer would be that an intervention, and that's what we do, it always consists of suggestions of new practices, right? Like emotional, behavioral, cognitive, bodily. And those new suggestions must be adapted and preserved by local people for our interventions to be sustainable. And for that to happen, we need to offer these people, our students, new practices that are also organic to their local culture and their local scripts. And let me tell you, that's hard. I mean, in the international work field, we're used to seeing experts and teachers from one culture arriving to a different one and repeating the what and how of what they do in their home countries. And they often fail the sustainability test, and I don't blame them. Understanding local culture and creating adaptations isn't easy. It's not something one just knows. It requires skills and tools and information, but luckily, these are skills and tools that can be learned and practiced, and this information can be generated. So how can we generate local information? And first, I want to say that we already have tools. We can learn a lot from listening to our intuition, our experience, and our students, and react to whatever happens during the class in real time. And sometimes that's all we need. But in some cases, it isn't enough. Sometimes I need more information. And for me personally, in my work, I want to achieve goals like sustainable psychological and behavioral change. I want to achieve community change I want to train local staff who will work in the job for a long time. And in order to achieve these specific goals responsibly, I believe I need to actually research the local culture and receive more information. So in the CAPE model, this is what we're trying to do. So our model consists of 3 overlapping phases. One is participatory cultural research. The second is creating research-informed classes and training programs. And the third is training local women to become empowerment self-defense instructors. I'll try to give you a taste of what we do in each phase. I don't know how much time we have. We'll see where we go. So in the research, our main research goal is to get to know gender-based violence scripts in each location we work in. So in Dominican Republic, we worked in a neighborhood in the city and in a rural village. So these are 2 locations that were researched separately, and the findings and the ESD classes were different in each place. In the beginning of the research phase, we phrased 3 research questions, and our research plan was designed to answer them. And we believe that gathering information about these 3 questions will help us better understand violence scripts in a place. So our questions were: 1, what happens in this violent encounter, step by step? Who says what? Tones of speaking, facial expression, interpersonal distance, possible reactions, how does it begin, how does it end? We asked, what are the cultural gender roles and expectations, and how do they manifest in these scripts of violence? And 3, we asked, what are the perceptions of power and vulnerability of each gender in the location we research, and how does this gender, how are these perceptions manifest in these scripted violent interactions? So we used methods that are qualitative and participatory, because this is what we know how to do. And also because from our past experience, quantitative methods don't generate the kind of information that can be usable for us as teachers. So we use those methods. I can't go into all these methods. I'll just say we researched the statistic laws, previous research in Dominican Republic and GBV there. We did participant observations in public and personal spaces to identify patterns of interactions, especially between men and women, talking, body language, touch, and interpersonal distance. We researched children toys, dress codes, commercial, popular music, and media. We conducted semi-structured interviews with men and women of a variety of ages, ethnicities, and classes. We spoke with individuals, couples, families, and groups, large and small, whoever would agree to speak with us, basically. And with these same people, we used participatory methods from the international development field. And these methods are actually designed to allow community members to partner with researchers and perform a collaborative investigation of a community. And we use activities, games, ethno-theater, and drawings to generate local knowledge that is richer than what other methods provide. We had to adjust these methods to suit our needs because no one tried before us to research what we were interested in. We created, I think, a dozen research activities. I'll give you an example for one participatory research activity. We created a database of images of violent and threatening situations. The participants in each communities were asked to divide the pictures into 3 piles, like this happens here a lot, this doesn't happen here, this sometimes happens here. And then they were asked to choose the 10 most prevalent images of violence out of the this happens here a lot pile. And we asked them to rate those from 1 to 10 based on prevalence. And then we asked them to take the 5 most prevalent images and demonstrate for us step by step what happens in these situations. So some used theater and acted, some used combination of descriptions and demonstrations, and we asked them to really go into details like how it looks, feels, and sounds, how the face, body, and voice respond in these situations, how it starts, progresses, ends. And we learned a lot about scripts of violence from these methods. But they also allowed the research phase to become part of the intervention. So as it allowed people to look at violence in their lives from a new perspective, it also allowed them to form a special connection and rapport with us. They later came to our classes and trainings and partner with us in our work. And together we kind of continued decrypting the local scripts and exploring possible acceptable alternatives to them, creating shared local knowledge in cycles of research and actions that allowed us to work together for change. So obviously we had so much information and we needed to develop tools for analyzing it. I won't go into it now. I will say that we wanted information that helps us understand the step-by-step dynamic or to actually create a simulation of violent interaction in class. And we also really wanted to discover the possible barriers and catalyzers towards ESD that our students might face during classes. We made sure that we only took into account recurring information that was gathered from at least 3 different research tools and information that we can use as teachers. So really, this is not academy research. It doesn't need to be published. It only needs to help us as teachers to adapt our classes and trainings. So I don't know, I think I'm running out of time, so let's see. I can give you an example of how we analyzed information. Let me see if Judith agrees. Judith, do you agree? Okay.
I'd like to leave some time for questions, and there's some things that are coming up.
So can I have a minute to summarize?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, we analyzed the information. We got so much information, and we really adapted our classes. We changed what we teach and how we teach. Some activities were similar to those we do in Israel, but we had just to change the content. Some activities we had to create new ones, so they'll be organic to our students. It was really a great process, such a creative process. I really liked it. And we got really good feedback from students, all of whom came to all of the classes and participated and reported using what they learned. And I don't know, this doesn't happen often in these kind of projects, that all of our 60 or 70 students kept coming back and participating and saying they actually use it. So we took it as a good sign that we did a fair enough adaptation to the class plans. And the last thing I want to tell you about is that we developed our own way of training local staff in a short amount of time, in a way that would be culturally suitable and more sustainable in our eyes. And I won't describe it, I don't have time. I just want to say that one of the things we tried to do was to plan and sustain a very planned partnership between us and the local instructors that allows continuous work to further research local culture and adapt classes to it. So we are the experts in ESD, they are the experts for their own lives and culture. And if we can combine this, it's really a great partnership. Some of you met 2 of my favorite partners, Pacha and Tamima, and that's one of our results. So thank you for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much. I do have a question here that I'd like to read. How can you get men and women to accept violence? Sometimes cultures accept certain norms, and how can we change their mindset? Renee, would you like to address that first?
I think it's the constant, I think, all right, for me as an outsider, if you're asking how as an outsider do you come in and enact change, it means that you have to kind of step back and you have to kind of whisper in people's ear and find out who agrees with you. I mean, in the 15 years I've been in Belize, that's basically what I have done. I have found like-minded people and let them speak. Let them speak the truth, and I am there to back them up, rather than me going head first in and saying, I think this and I think that, and this is the way. And as this is one of my students who asked this question. So as you know, Feliciana, I've been there for a while, and now people do have a little bit more respect. But you also know that there are things that we have tried to do, like having campaigns, getting in the media, having groups of people come out and say, this is our new truth. This is what we want to change. Tamar?
Tamar?
Can you repeat the question? I want to hear it again, please.
Hold on 1 second. I know. Nope, that's the next thing. 1 second, 1 second. Oh, here we go.
No, it's that one
right here. How can you get men and women to accept violence? Sometimes cultures accept norms, certain norms. How can we change their mindset that those actual norms are violent?
I'm not sure we can. I'm not sure it's part of our job to create norms change. In order to change norms, that's something that needs a society and a community working for a long time. I think the way I see it is that I think for me in community work, I would try to work with all groups of the community and find out where everyone are feeling vulnerable, threatened, and how they choose to respond to it, and try to work on just helping them change their everyday behaviors to feel more protected or more safe. And that includes men, even when they are the aggressors. And I think after you work with the different groups in the community, then you want to use community methods to create a community discourse regarding the group experiences of different groups, and then create a shared language of safety. Now, I'm not saying it's going to necessarily last, but I think that's what I would try to do. I would move step by step and then help the community create its own vocabulary, and also cooperate with other community organizations that can stay inside a community longer than I do, at least in the international field.
Renee, do you have something to add?
No.
Okay. So Carrie wrote, I'd love to hear Tamar describe one example of changing a part of a local violence script.
Okay, cool. So basically, what we did was very similar to what we do in ESD classes. I mean, the methods are very similar. But let's think about it this way. One very popular common script in Dominican Republic is of domestic violence that starts when a woman is approaching her husband and blames him for not bringing money into the household and wasting all of it on gambling and drinking. And sometimes she does it in public spaces. So the man is feeling, well, his face, like his honor is hurt. And also in Dominican Republic, the ideal woman a man usually fantasizes on is very supportive and nurturing. So not only does he lose honor, but also she's not the ideal woman that all the media and the music taught him that he's going to get, basically. And then what they do is that they immediately start screaming, and then they are beating each other up. They are both using violence, and then usually she's left at home and he's leaving. Now, one of the things we saw very strongly at some of our students is that when they were trying to tell their husbands what is painful for them in this situation, they used a lot of aggressive body stance and the tone of voice that it's escalating the situation. It's not something that they're thinking of. It's just a part of the way women are performing femininity in Dominican Republic, at least in the places where I've been. So this specific behavior escalated the situation very much, and the actual physical violence came faster. So we worked a lot about de-escalation techniques that are really designed to help them calm themselves down, but also to really calm the other side down in order for them to be able to have boundary setting dialogue, which is something that I'm not used to doing in Israel because the script is different. But that's something that comes to mind. Another thing that we learned in the village especially was that for women, their self-worth and self-efficacy had a lot to do with church. So in order for us to do this kind of work of connecting women to their strengths and abilities and kind of helping them discover it, we actually did a lot of activities that had to do with church and the Catholic belief and women inside this community church system. And that helped them because in different stages of the script, of the escalation of the situation, we kind of explored the ways they can, use what they feel is strong in them, according to the church and the church community, but also how they can actually use some of the church people and the church dialogues to get inner belief in their abilities and their right to actually stop a situation. That was also an interesting kind of work. For a Jewish person, I'm Jewish. So it's like, I hope that answered the question. It's late in Israel.
It's very late in Israel. It's 11 o'clock at night there, so you have to be nice to Tamar. So we have another comment or question. Hold on. Many people off the street would narrate a sexual assault in a way that is almost entirely guided by myths prevalent in the media. Did you have to adjust the participants' narratives based on statistics or other data? Were you worried that the common conception of violence did not match reality?
Okay, so that's a wonderful question. Thank you so much, Natalie. So this is really interesting because when I did media research and I saw the perceptions of the media about sexual violence, and I also talked to people in interviews. And in interviews, people usually tell you what they think you want to hear, or the cultural myths. So yeah, what people said in interviews and what the media showed were very similar. But that's the great value of participatory methods and of observations, because when I was just sitting in the market for hours, or in a friend's Sunday family lunch, and I just observed, I could see the real interactions in everyday life that are also possibly violent or aggressive. And I could see it because I was there, because I wasn't just counting on people's reports. And the participatory methods were amazing, because sometimes people would tell us in interviews, they would tell us all the myths about violence, but then you would engage them in this visual art, theater activities, and they just forgot all that. They just started saying, no, but you remember this happens to my neighbor. They were sometimes discussing between themselves. It produced different kind of information, and that's why I really like those methods. So.
Would you like to just add something for our last comment?
Sure. I would just like to say, as it goes in Belize, we really don't have any research on any real good, we don't have good data on very much. But just anecdotally, by looking at the comments that are made in social media, that would probably be one of my easiest ways. We have a big problem with what used to be called carnal knowledge and has luckily most recently been changed to unlawful sexual intercourse. That's a minor having sexual intercourse with an adult. And when those reports are made that this person of this age was accused of unlawful sexual intercourse, there is a barrage of comments made by both men and women that the child was asking for it, that she wants it. She's, well, they call it hot crotch in Belize, meaning that she's going out there and looking for it. And so I would just say that, you know, that is obviously, that's not the reality. But I also would say there is recently been a voice against that people are speaking up, and that's men and women included, and saying these are children, these are not adults, and it's the adult's responsibility in those kind of cases. So I think that with the messages that we're able to send, if we can send those same messages and we can support those messages in the communities we're working in, we have a chance to make change.
So with that, I'd like to thank both of our speakers and all of our participants. And this was a very informative session. And we look forward to seeing some of you, if not all of you, at 4:30 EST time. It's very late for the Israelis. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you everyone for listening. Have a great day. Bye.